Hello, I'm Joe Schubeck, and I'd like to share some memories with you. My first memory is how easy I got in and out of this car back in 1965. Drag racing became my big desire the day I began reading Hot Rod Magazine about the new trend that started in Southern California. That's what gave me goosebumps. In Cleveland, with snow-covered streets, I read and reread the stories by Hot Rod editor Wally Parks describing the upcoming superstars and their quest for more power and lighter cars. But it wasn't the coupes or roadsters that got my attention. It was the all-out rail jobs, as they were called. I read every Peterson magazine I could get my hands on, and my big wish was to someday compete against those I read about, not only in California, but throughout the U.S. Well, as the saying goes, be careful what you wish for. A coincidence, maybe. But I got to know a man who had just opened a speed shop in my hometown. His name was Jack Harris. Soon after we met, he invited me to see what he had just completed building in his home workshop. I was shocked to see a slingshot dragster, a concept that was ahead of its time in 1954. Fitted with a flathead Ford race engine, it was not quite ready to race, but close, when he decided to change course and devote all his time to his racing parts business. Long story short, I inherited a dragster, and Jack went on to create the largest high-performance parts business in the United States. It was called Rush Sales. With the help of some select students and even a few shop teachers in my senior class at Lakewood High School, I readied the car for my first drag race put on by the Akron Cam Jammers. Sorry to say, shortly thereafter, the flathead Ford engine became obsolete by the newer overhead valve Chrysler Hemi. In 1958, I started my business in Lakewood, where I built the first dragster chassis for myself in the basement of my parents' home. With it came my first taste of real power with the kick I got from the supercharged Chrysler. My home turf, Dragway 42, was often invaded by the likes of Gordon Collett and Connie Coletta with the same engine combination, which made for some close competition. At the first NHRA Nationals in Indianapolis, I lined up against Tom McEwen. We both left the starting line together with a perfectly matched pair of wheel stands for quite a distance down the strip. And then both cars set the wheels down exactly together like it was choreographed. I was told the crowd went wild. I think that's when we both first realized that we were not just drag racers. We were in the entertainment business. In Union Grove, Wisconsin, where I was already qualified with my gas dragster, Top Fuel contestant Art Malone asked me to make a run in his car so he could watch how it left the starting line. I did, and that's when the bug bit me. Back home, I converted my engine to run on nitro, and from that time on, gasoline was only for the tow car. The flagman was still starting the races when nitro was reintroduced, and I felt for sure the flagman had more guts than us drivers, standing so close in between those fuel cars. On the chassis building side of my business, I discovered a breakthrough in metalworking technology that led me to develop a one-piece, no-weld bell housing. Initially, I intended these beautiful aluminum housings for our dragster production only. But when we tested and found our steel version would contain all the shrapnel from flywheel and clutch explosions, I knew that I was headed toward a crash intersection with destiny and would soon have to make a life-changing decision. These grenade-like explosions were a regular occurrence every weekend around the country, caused mostly by showroom muscle cars that were flooding the drag strips during that era. Many drivers and spectators were injured and even killed. The huge need for our Lakewood housings demanded my prompt exit in 1965 from a drag racing career that I had so long desired. It may have been the hardest decision I ever made, but common sense prevailed, and even though I no longer campaigned a race car, I enjoyed producing and marketing a product that saved lives and stayed number one in sales in its category for almost 50 years. The Lakewood High-Tech Scatter Shield was a game changer both for the sport and for me. The late Wally Parks, founder of the NHRA, told me that Lakewood's containment method helped save drag racing because spectator claims had gone over the top and NHRA's track insurance was on the verge of being canceled. But now, as I look back, there has been nothing that has lit my fire more than that time I spent in the seat of my top fuel dragster. I raced against hundreds of competitors in those 9 years, many of whom still remain friends. In my travels, I was overwhelmed with the hospitality shown me, and to pay back, I extended an open invitation to those I raced to be my guest at Lakewood whenever they were in the Cleveland area. Well, I didn't think they would all come at once, but they did. And we had enough fuel dragsters in our parking lot to put on at least an 8-car show every weekend in the summer. 2 popular photos taken outside our shop in 1964 show the stars of that era, like Tommy Ivo, Roland Leong, Marvin Schwartz, Jack Williams, Bob Sullivan, Jimmy Nix, Jerry Baltus, and Mike Snively, just to name a few. It was a repair station to many, but almost everyone agreed it was being part of a special group where all summer long was like Racer Party Central. Today I relive some of those great memories every time I fire up the engine in my vintage fuel dragster at what we call Tackle Fest. Well, I hope you enjoyed a small portion of my drag racing past. And if you care to see more, don't eject, but watch and listen to what a couple of industry greats, Dave McClellan and George Eisenhart, have to say about the Lakewood High-Tech Scatter Shield bell housing. Clearly a home run for Lakewood Industries, but a painful goodbye to my competitive drag racing career back in 1965. Plus, you'll get a short but special story about the introduction of the Hearst Harry Oldsmobile.
Welcome, we're live right here, SEMA 2014 at the beautiful SEMA stage, and I'm standing next to my friend, Gentleman Joe Schubeck. How you doing today, sir?
Great, Dennis, great.
How does a guy get a name like Gentleman Joe?
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that. That goes back to my childhood. I guess my mother she always taught me, she says, you know, when you're out with a lady, you got to open the car door, and when you're in a restaurant, you got to put the chair under, you got to act like you had some training, and so I've always done that. When I was at a drag race event in the Midwest, this drag news writer, Ben Brown, he was there covering the event, and he's looking at me opening up the car door for his girlfriend of mine, and we were in a restaurant, and I was doing that, and he says, you don't seem like a drag racer. You seem like a real gentleman, like a college professor or something, Says, we really kind of I don't see any of these other guys doing this kind of stuff. So anyway, it was something I tried to sweep under the rug because I thought it was kind of corny. And but I told Eskandarian about it, and Eskandarian says, "Aha! I got something just for you." And he had a hot top hat that he was saving for a few years, and he says, "See if this fits." And he blunked that hat down on his arm, and it whoop, and he put it on and it fit. And he says, "Hey, we're going to make something out of this." And he painted up my car with all the Gentleman Joe stuff, and Mickey Thompson thought it was a good idea. And Eskandarian's ads in the Drag News would say, "Gentleman Joe from Cleveland, Ohio is coming out to California with his Esky-powered Chrysler dragster, looking to take on all comers from Lions drag strip." You know, it was. And Mickey Thompson liked it because he was another storyteller. Between Esky and Mickey Thompson, they were the greatest creative writers that I've ever known. Anyway, that's kind of a long story short, but it was something that I never could get rid of, and I think it's kind of nice.
Well, there's nothing wrong with mom teaching you right. That's what I would have said. My mom taught me right to open the door. You and I have had a little bit of a connection. I was lucky enough to work for Hot Rod Magazine for a while, and you have some great history with Mr. Peterson, and I always refer to him as Mr. Peterson. I was never lucky enough to meet the man, but you have had some great history with Hot Rod Magazine and everything going on there.
When I was I think 13 years old and living in Lakewood, Ohio, outside of Cleveland, those were real cold winters and the snow on the ground. And my friend Dewey and I, we used to go up to the Delicatessen and we'd get the Hot Rod Magazine and we read it, and then we'd reread it and read it from back to front to back, and we do everything. We thought we were the best engine builders going in our minds. And so we, my desire was to be a drag racer one day and build one of those cars like they were racing on the West Coast, and even go out to the West Coast sometime and race with them. But it was really a distant dream. It was like going to Mars.
You made it though.
Yeah, you got to be careful what you wish for. So that kind of drag racing experience started for me when I was in Cleveland, because I ran into a guy by the name of Jack Harris, who just happened to have a dragster almost all finished and built, but he had his mind set on being in the speed business. And Rush Sales was the name of the company. So I took over that car, and see, the difference between back then and now when you're going dragster racing is that you had to be everything. You had to be the welder, you had to put the tires together, you had to build the engine, you had to paint the car, you had to make the rear end and do all the linkage, and then between doing all that, you had to be on the phone calling the strip operator to see if you can get some money to go out there, you know. So it was, you had to be a painter. I mean, it was, nowadays you got to, the teams have a bottom end guy, they got a guy for blowers, they got a guy, you know how that goes.
Yeah.
So it's a little richer, but back then there wasn't any money, and it was really a bare bones deal, but it was a lot of fun.
If you had to summarize your incredible career from beginning to end, what would be the one memory that might stand out among others?
Oh boy, there was so many great times and all that when all that happened back there. I'll tell you the worst time. Let me just turn that around a minute. The worst time I ever had, the worst decision I ever had to make was I had built dragster chassis to pay for the fuel to go traveling with. And while I was doing all that processing, I came across a process for forming metal called hydroforming. And we took flat discs of metal and we put them in this machine, and it formed these beautiful shapes. And we made Lakewood scatter shield out of it, and it was a containment for all the shrapnel and the debris coming from flywheels and clutches exploding.
Sure.
And it was a great thing. Well, Jack Harris, the guy that sponsored me into drag racing, now with a big distribution speed shop, said, better get out of that dragster. We've got orders, we could sell thousands of those bell housing scatter shields, and I was making about 2 a month. So I thought, he says, you gotta get out of there. And I says, do you mean quit drag racing? And he says, yeah. You don't want to do that. You got to go into make some money. You're sitting on $1 million product here. And I says, oh, I'm not going to quit drag racing,
You can't stop racing. You can't stop racing.
That. Forget the whole thing. So he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll help you out. I'm cutting you off as your sponsor. So that started. I'm thinking, oh, no more money at all. Right. So I did that, and it wasn't 6 months later. Boy, we were putting skids of scatter shields out the door in trucks, and money was coming in wheelbarrows full. And I'm thinking, boy, this isn't so bad at all. I could build 5 dragsters now and sponsor myself. But I didn't want to do that anymore because I was kind of in a race for another kind of race, you know, and I was still involved a little bit with racing, but I was now involved with all the higher echelon of the high performance industry, which was, you know, the Edelbrocks, the Eskandarians, and all the Petersons, and I was kind of over in that camp and went and hanging out with those people, the manufacturers. And then, of course, got into SEMA, and I was on the board of directors. I couldn't help listening to Leo Kagan just a while ago. He was telling about how he had to really wrestle with the board of directors to get the SEMA show out of Anaheim because it wasn't going to be big enough and it needed to grow. And so, I'm sitting down there and I'm listening, and he finally got convinced. I was on that board of directors. You want to hear some of the real negatives of why that?
Oh no, I don't know. Maybe we should.
I'll just tell you one.
Okay.
We don't want to go to Las Vegas because all the buyers from all over the East Coast are going to be coming out there with bags of money to buy products, and they're going to lose it all on the casino's crap tables. And that's why we shouldn't go.
Well, it still worked out for everybody. The best part, Gentleman Joe, is whether it was good times, bad times, or rough times, or just going down the quarter mile, you always kept that hat and you always kept that smile. And we thank you so much for coming up on the SEMA Central stage. Thank you so much. And don that hat because that's your signature.
Fabulous.
More coming up right here. SEMA Central 2014 SEMA. We'll see you soon. And there it is.
Founded in 1959 by Joe Shubeck, Lakewood Industries has grown from a one-man chassis shop in Lakewood, Ohio, to a major manufacturer of safety and suspension products. Best known as the originator of the hydroformed safety bell housings, in 1962, Shubeck applied a new metalworking process to create a revolutionary product for racing safety. A new process at that time, hydroforming was used only by government contractors to make missile nose cones for the defense industry. At first, his hydroformed aluminum bell was intended only as a direct drive housing for dragsters, but shortly thereafter, the all-steel version replaced the factory die-cast aluminum transmission housings and successfully contained shrapnel from disintegrating clutch and flywheel explosions. With these explosions a common occurrence at drag strips around the country, the new steel scatter shield was a game-changer. They made Lakewood Industries the leader in containment bell housings over all competitors for the past 50 years. In a recent survey taken by Prestolite, Lakewood Industries was the most recognizable logo over all their other brands. The real secret of the scatter shield bell housing is the hydroforming process. Unlike competitive bell housings, Lakewood's deep draw process actually increases the sidewall thickness in the process of forming where additional strength is desired. Other metal forming processes tend to stretch and thin the metal where the strength is needed to contain the blast from a clutch or flywheel explosion. When your personal safety is on the line, you can rely on total containment from Lakewood Scatter Shield housings. After all, Gentleman Joe Shubeck is the drag racer and manufacturer who started Lakewood Industries.
Next up, a guy that I actually idolized because I did my drag racing in Ohio and over in Indiana. I'm talking, of course, about George Eisenhart Sr. George, would you come up?
I would be remiss again if I didn't thank my friends and family, you know, as you go through life, the only thing you're going to have at the end is your memories. So make sure they're good ones along the way. I sure did. I was lucky enough to find a way to make a living in the sport I loved. I started in 1957. I won my first trophy in 1957 at Holland Dragway near Youngstown. And I was a line mechanic at a Ford agency, and the people that owned the drag strip they had just built in Thompson were losing it. It was going under. They asked me if I would like to try running it. Now, they knew me only because I raced there every weekend, and I had some successes with my car. And I said, well, sure, I could run it. You know, I was a 23-year-old. I just got out of the Army. I was 23 years old, and I was a line mechanic, and so I felt certain I knew how to run a drag strip. Well, the fact is I had no idea how to run anything. But as time went along, you know, poverty is the mother of invention. And we were flat broke most of our life, but we made a living doing what we loved in a sport that we loved. I was lucky enough to make a career out of my hobby. Not many people get to say that. There's a guy sitting here in the front row that we all owe a debt of gratitude to, and that's Joe Schubeck. When I first took over the drag strip in 1962, every weekend we were blowing clutches and sending flywheels out through the strip grandstands. And not many people know this, but I had to endure 9 fatal accidents in my career at the 5 racetracks. Not all of them were drag races, some were at the oval tracks as well. But I remember a flywheel piece about the size of a piece of pie flying up through the grandstands and taking a girl's arm off. And we wouldn't have survived another couple of years because the insurance companies were absolutely beside themselves. And Joe here designed the hydroform bell housing that gave us that explosion-proof protection that we needed. And from that day forward, thanks to Joe, we were able to run sportsman cars that had those high-rev and Chevy motors that were launching those clutches through the grandstands and taking people's foot off and brake lines off and so forth. And he kept us going, and Joe, we certainly owe you that.